Effective immediately. You're terminated. The word struck the air like an ice pick. I blinked, my hand still resting on the edge of the sleek conference table. The clock above the frosted glass door read 8:45 a.m., each tick hammering the moment deeper into my ribs. Across from me stood Evan Mercer, 33. Crisp gray suit, perfectly knotted tie, and that same unnerving calm he used to have when bluffing through high school poker nights. I once bandaged his scraped knee on a hiking trail in Boulder. Now he couldn't even look me in the eye. I am Julia Lane, 61 years old. And for nearly 34 years, Lane Logistics was more than my job. It was my identity. I was here before we even had Wi-Fi, before we opened our first West Coast office. I slept on the factory couch during the '97 shipment crisis. I held this place together with blood and bandwidth through divorces, hurricanes, and mergers. I built it, from steel inventory tags to international contracts. I missed birthdays, skipped funerals. I buried my 20s and 40s under quarterly reports, all for a company run by a man who once called me Miss Jules and tried to fax me his crayon drawings. Evan, the CEO's only son. He didn't fight for this role. He inherited it, just like the penthouse, the nameplate, the corner office. His resume came stapled to his last name. But privilege doesn't teach you legacy, loyalty, or the cost of what you're so quick to throw away. The other executives sat frozen eyes glued to their tablets, avoiding the wreckage in front of them. The hum of the air vent above us only made the silence feel colder. My throat burned, but I didn't let my voice crack. Then Evan leaned forward, voice smooth and surgical. "It's not personal, Julia. It's business." My own words. I fed him that line when he was 16, trying to teach him how to survive boardrooms. I never thought I was arming him to fire me. As I rose from the chair, fingers tight around my leather binder, a single thought crystallized. This wasn't just business. This was betrayal, gift-wrapped in entitlement. The glass door whispered shut behind me. My heels struck the concrete hallway with more fury than grace. 34 years erased in under 5 minutes, and the echo left behind wasn't silence. It was war. The hallway still smelled faintly of lemon polish, sharp and clean, just like it did the first morning I stepped into this building. I was 26 then, a receptionist answering phones in a borrowed blazer, dreaming about building something permanent in a world that rarely offered women the floor, let alone the roof. I gave it everything. Nights collapsed into mornings over lukewarm coffee and sheer belief that effort meant something. I still remember the 1998 freight crisis. Half our carriers stalled in Oklahoma, frozen accounts deadlines stacked like dominoes. I stayed in this building 3 straight nights, cold calling clients, chasing suppliers, whispering reassurance I wasn't sure I believed. We made it not by chance, but because I wouldn't let my brother's vision rot under poor leadership. He used to watch me from the mezzanine above the production floor. Arms crossed, lips curled in that tight smile of silent approval. "This company survives on backbone," he'd say, his voice rough with Marlboros and conviction. That belief carried me through storms, the 2008 collapse, when I refinanced my condo to cover payroll, and the sleepless months of scaling nationwide when Lane Logistics became more than just a family name, it became a force. And yet, none of it counted in that boardroom. Not the Christmases I spent chasing clients across time zones, not the funerals I missed, not the sleepless years when I sold myself the lie that devotion would equal protection. I stepped into my office, a curated museum of milestones, inked contracts, trade awards, press clippings, all dulled under betrayal's shadow. I set my leather folder on the desk and sank into the chair shaped by decades of my resolve. My chest burned not just from grief, but from the sting of betrayal. This wasn't a pivot. This was a purge. The screen flickered, new emails. I scanned them numbly until one subject line snapped me awake. From Harold Kent, subject Clause 17. I clicked. Clause 17 remains active. They can't move without you. For the first time that morning, I inhaled fully. Everything that had been stripped from me, the titles, the room, the respect, suddenly didn't matter. Because Evan had just fired the one person whose signature still controlled the operational license. He thought today was the end. He had no idea it might be the start of his unraveling. I leaned back, that faint smile forming. William was right. Backbone keeps things alive. Just not always the one they expected. The scent of cinnamon and pine clung to the air, that night mingling with the laughter echoing through the old Lane farmhouse. Twinkling lights looped across the oak banisters, reflecting softly off the picture frames and polished floors. It was last Christmas, my first real holiday off in years, and for a fleeting moment I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we were okay. Evan had flown in from Manhattan, all smiles and charm, carrying a bottle of imported wine and a story about turbulence over Ohio. Jules, he called when he came through the door. Arms open, his voice laced with warmth that felt familiar. He pulled me into a hug and kissed my cheek, and for that brief heartbeat, I believed in the illusion. The living room was full, my mother recounting how William had started Lane Logistics with nothing but a loan, a truck, and stubborn grit. The fireplace glowed, laughter layered the room like a quilt, and Evan sat beside me, nodding along, eyes bright, listening as if the past mattered to him. When the pie hit the table, he raised his glass. "To family," he said. Then he turned to me, adding, "And to the people who built the foundation we all stand on." I smiled. I even blinked back tears. I thought he meant it. I thought he saw it, that this legacy was a living thing, and I was handing it to him in trust. So when the board floated the idea of bringing him in, start as VP, shadow me, learn the bones of the business, I didn't hesitate. He was William's son. He was blood. But now I see that night differently. The man by the bar, Italian suit, platinum cufflinks, Evan's so-called old college friend. He laughed a little too easily, hovered a little too long. I barely noticed him then, too busy lighting candles and passing shortbread. But now I remember the handshake. The way they exchanged a glance, tight, knowing. That wasn't a friend. That was a lawyer. A pawn placed long before the knife twisted. I can still hear Evan's voice, sweet as bourbon and twice as dangerous. "One day, I'll make you proud." And I believed him. God help me. I wanted to believe him. I lifted my glass that night, smiling at the boy I helped raise, and unknowingly handed him the blade he'd bury in my back. The apartment was silent, save for the soft hum of the baseboard heaters warming the corners of the loft. I stepped out of my heels, letting them fall to the hardwood with a dull thud. No hesitation this time. I walked straight to the walnut cabinet beneath the window, hands steady, breath calm. I pressed my thumb to the back panel and slid it open. A hidden compartment revealed a small steel key, cold, familiar, precise. The safe was old. Older than Evan. Older than the lies. Its bronze dial was dulled from decades of careful use, a relic of William's legacy. With a few practiced turns, it clicked, and the scent of cedar oil and aging paper rose like a ghost from the past. Inside was everything Evan Mercer never bothered to look for. The trust documents, drafted and signed 10 years ago in William's study, back when he first sensed succession would bring fracture instead of unity. I lifted them gently. Legal parchment, embossed seals. Real power never had to shout. I flipped through the pages until I reached it. Clause 17, dual trigger provision. Should any founding executive be removed without written consent, the acting vice president assumes full fiduciary responsibility for all existing and future liabilities incurred during and after said removal. I read it once, then again. Each word coiled tighter around my ribs, then loosened like release. Evan thought his MBA was enough. He thought ambition was protection. But ambition is only armor if you understand the terrain. He'd walked straight into a legal minefield. One William planted, not in spite, but because of love. That day still lingered in my memory. William's study bathed in amber light shadows, striping the desk. He leaned back in his worn chair, silver hair catching the sun. "Never trust power to blood," he'd murmured, his hand firm on mine. Not without proof of loyalty. I didn't question him then. I just signed, wanting to prove I was worthy of the foundation he built. Now I understood. Loyalty wasn't inherited. It was earned, and Evan had never earned it. My phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. Rachel Maddox. He thinks you'll beg. Don't? I stared at her words until they etched into my spine. They weren't consolation. They were a match. Beg, never. I bled for this company. I mortgaged my condo for it. I held it together when men like Evan Mercer were still learning how to pronounce equity. I slid the trust documents back into the safe and turned the key, one smooth click, as final and satisfying as a gavel strike. Evan thought he'd pushed me out. What he really did was chain himself to the fallout. The loft was quiet except for the faint ticking of the old brass clock above the stove. Outside, the skyline flickered in the haze of winter gray. But inside, everything felt suspended, like breath held just before a plunge. I sat on the edge of the dining table, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of cold coffee. The bitterness didn't bother me. It fit. The documents from last night were still spread across the table, their sharp language biting through the silence like barbed wire. Dual trigger liability. William's hidden safeguard, quiet as shadow, lethal as steel. For years I forgot it existed, because I believed in blood. Now it was my shield. And Evan's collapse. I took another slow sip, letting the cold liquid anchor me. Rage is quick and messy. It burns hot, then fizzles into smoke. What I needed was clarity, precision, ice-cold execution. The phone glowed beside me like a live wire. I tapped the screen, stared at my reflection, a calm I barely recognized, and scrolled through names I hadn't looked at in years. Daniel Briggs, our longtime corporate counsel, trusted by William when trust meant everything. He answered on the first ring. His voice was older, yes, but sharp like glass just before it breaks. Julia, he said, already knowing. I've been expecting this. Clause 17, I said. Is it still binding? A short pause, then a smile in his tone. Every word, and from what I hear, Evan just activated it. Clean as glass. I closed my eyes. That phrase again. Clean as glass. For the first time in days, my chest didn't ache. It expanded. Send me everything, I murmured. I'll handle the rest. William would be proud, Daniel said gently before the line went silent. I stared at the phone for a long moment, his words echoing in the hush. Would he? Pride has weight when it presses against grief. I looked toward the fireplace. A photo sat on the mantel, me, William, and Evan at the lake the summer before he died. Evan was 8, beaming with a fishing rod in hand. I once thought that smile meant legacy. Now I saw it for what it was. Preparation. The memory burned like sunlight on still water. William's arm around my shoulders, both of us squinting at the lake as I held the bucket of fish. A perfect summer day, suspended in amber. It used to make me smile. Now it felt like a quiet warning. Fragile things break, especially trust. I stood, gathered the legal documents, and slid them into my worn leather folder with reverence and resolve. My laptop glowed awake at a single keystroke. Spreadsheets blinked to life. Balance, sheets, vendor obligations, board member affiliations. Weapons in disguise. If Evan wanted war, I'd oblige. But not with shouts. Not with press releases. Mine would be cold, surgical, and finished before he heard it coming. The restaurant was all soft amber lights and the scent of rosemary roasting in the back. Outside, snow drifted across the sidewalk, frosting the city in a quiet hush. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt like peace. Almost. Evan was already seated when I arrived, his navy blazer cutting a crisp silhouette against the oxblood leather booth. He stood as I approached, that polished smile fixed in place, the one he used to flash after skipping curfew and hoping I wouldn't tell his father. "Aunt Julia," he said gently, pulling out my chair like a gentleman from another time. "Thanks for coming. I don't want this to get ugly." There it was, that familiar earnestness. The voice he used when he called from grad school asking for help with tuition. I let myself feel the ghost of affection. He reached for his wine-glass fingers, brushing near mine. "Mom's in pieces. She cried half the night," he murmured. "She kept saying William would hate seeing us fight. William Lane, my brother." The name lodged in my throat like glass. I could see him again laughing at Sunday dinner, carving roast Evan bouncing in his lap. For one treacherous second, I wanted to believe this boy still carried that same heart. I listened as he spoke about reconciliation, about family, about finding a way back. His words poured like honey over glass. And God help me, I let them touch me, until he leaned in just a hair too close and said, "All I need is for you to admit, maybe you overreacted." The air went still. His smile was thin, calculated. The screen of his phone sat face down, too close to his coat pocket. My pulse spiked. My gut clenched. When the check arrived, he stood quickly and reached for it. Too quickly. If you're holding your breath like I am wondering what Julia will do next, don't miss what's coming. Tap subscribe so you won't miss the moment everything turns. The real reckoning is just beginning. That's when I saw it. A small black sliver tucked into the inside pocket of Evan's blazer, barely visible but unmistakable. A voice recorder. Cold flooded my chest like ice water breaking through thin glass. I didn't flinch. Not when he returned, not when he smiled and slipped back into the booth. I performed calm, like a concert pianist, every movement measured, rehearsed. We hugged under the streetlight snow, falling between us like a curtain. He smiled. I smiled. We said goodbye, and I let him walk away, thinking I'd been duped. But something inside me cracked, loud, clean final. The last shard of trust I had left the fragile hope I clung to like driftwood in a sinking sea. Shattered. He hadn't come to make peace. He came to bait a confession. Record it, spin it, wrap it around my throat and tighten. As the snow melted on my coat, one truth solidified in my marrow. If Evan wanted war, he should pray he could stomach his own tactics. The apartment greeted me with its usual hush, the kind that breathes down your neck thick with memory and things unsaid. I sat on the edge of the bed, the glow of city lights bleeding through the blinds and fractured lines. My fingers found the small wooden box on the shelf. Untouched for years. The initials were worn soft. W.L. William Lane. My brother. I lifted the lid. The scent of cedar and aged paper rose like breath from the past. A single yellowed envelope sat on top. I opened it, the letter inside, so old the ink had begun to feather. But the words still cut. Promise me he'll never feel alone. My breath caught. My brother's handwriting, steady and unyielding, dragged me back into the hospital room where time had slowed to heartbeats and beeping monitors. The night he made me guardian, not in law, but in love. Evan stood in the corner, just 15, too proud to cry where anyone could see. William's hand gripped mine with surprising strength. "Julia," he rasped, voice cracked and dry. "Watch over him. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered. That vow shaped every decision I made after, every dollar I gave, every lesson I passed down. I kept my word, and Evan had turned it into a weapon. And tonight that promise feels like a blade twisting just beneath my ribs. Because as I held that letter in my hand, my phone vibrated against the comforter, buzz after buzz, until the screen lit up like fire on ice. Lane Logistics in turmoil. Julia Lane pushed out amid innovation disputes. Insiders suggest former COO resisted strategic modernization. Mercer comments, "It's time to evolve." The headlines screamed across my screen, each one louder than the last. My breath hitched. Notifications rolled in, news alerts, board emails, investor whispers. Then Evan's statement, bold and calculated, stared back at me. It's time to move beyond outdated traditions that no longer serve us. Outdated traditions. That was me. I gripped William's letter until it crumpled the paper, digging into my palm like it wanted to cut. A roar climbed up my spine. Grief, yes, but sharper. Anger. So this was his strategy. dismantle me publicly while smiling into microphones, wrap betrayal in buzzwords, and parade it as progress. The room pressed in around me, the air heavier than before. But one thing crystallized in my chest: if Evan wanted a PR war, he'd picked the wrong opponent. Because this time, I wasn't holding back. The first domino fell the next morning. My phone buzzed as the gray light crept through my windows. A message from Rachel lit the screen. Anderson Group won't sign. They require your counter-signature. Evan's in full panic. I stared at it, letting the heat build in my lungs. Anderson wasn't just a client. They were the client, the cornerstone of Lane Logistics' quarterly projections. Without them, Evan wouldn't just face board scrutiny, he'd drown in it. By 10 a.m., my inbox was a battlefield. Vendors freezing accounts, creditors pausing lines, staff texting in hushed loyalty. Evan rushed together a press call, but his voice, cracking under false calm, was leaking like a cracked pipe. And then Rachel's second message came through. Clause 17 triggered. He's personally liable. For all of it. I sat in the quiet and closed my eyes. The taste of steel filled my mouth, not from fear, but from restraint finally breaking. For weeks, I'd buried the urge to retaliate. Now, I'd buried my brother. I'd buried my pride. But I would not bury the truth. Not for Evan Mercer. Not anymore. I'd smothered the howl of betrayal beneath years of discipline. Years of swallowing pain and playing steady. But now, the trap William and I forged in his study a decade ago, quiet as a prayer, sharp as a blade, had finally sprung. Clean, silent, and absolute. Only victory didn't feel like triumph. It wasn't confetti or champagne. It was a low vibration in my bones, cold, bittersweet, echoing through the hollow places Evan had carved out with every lie he'd smiled through. The phone rang. I almost let it go until I saw her name, Linda Mercer, Evan's mother, my sister-in-law, the woman who once braided my hair during summer trips to Vermont, who sobbed into my arms the night we lost William. Julia. Her voice cracked like something brittle about to break. Please, don't destroy him. He's all I have left. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, but I couldn't speak. Silence stretched between us, her breath shallow and jagged. Mine held back like a dam about to fail. I wanted to say it wasn't me who destroyed Evan. It was his ambition, his deceit, his need to wear the crown without earning it. But I couldn't speak those words, not to her. My eyes drifted toward the mantel. William's photo sat in its silver frame, time-worn and steadfast. That smile, gentle, certain, cut through me like sunlight after storm clouds. I could still feel the weight of his hand on mine in that hospital room, could still hear his voice, weak but clear. Promise me he'll never feel alone. A bitter breath caught in my throat. I whispered to the room, to the photo, to the ghost he left behind. You handed me a war. I ended the call, quietly. My hand shook as I placed the phone back on the glass table. The city beyond the window stretched wide and merciless, its lights glittering with cold indifference. The first domino had fallen. More would follow. My phone vibrated again, and again. Evan's name flashing like a distress signal. 10 missed calls. 11. On the 12th, I picked up. There was only breathing at first. Uneven, rattled. Then his voice came through, cracked and stripped of all polish. Aunt Julia, I can't. The words fell apart on a sob. I can't lose everything. Please. I sat motionless in the darkened living room, the city's lights slicing across the walls in long, cold stripes. My fingers tightened around the phone until my nails pressed into skin. The pain grounded me. Evan, I said evenly, my tone flat, detached, like the winter sky outside the window. I was wrong, he blurted, his voice cracking. The words came fast, rushing, tumbling like loose gravel down a steep hill. The press, the interviews. It wasn't me. It was the PR team. They twisted it. It was just business. You taught me that, he added, desperate. You taught me everything. The confidence was gone. His voice, a hollow echo of the bravado he always carried like armor, now wavered, stripped bare. Don't let them take it all. I'll fix this. We can fix this. Just don't let me drown. I closed my eyes and gripped the armrest until the leather groaned beneath my hand. Inside me, a storm spun, wild grief clashing with fury, loyalty grinding against betrayal like gears stripped raw. And then, quietly, like a ghost, sliding in under the door came the memory he summoned. "Remember when you taught me to ride a bike," he whispered. "You ran the whole block with me, yelling like I'd won the Olympics. You didn't let go until you knew I wouldn't fall." The image hit me like a blade to the chest. A summer afternoon, maple leaves glowing gold, his tiny hands white-knuckled on the handlebars, my bare feet slapping pavement, my breath coming in gasps, not from exhaustion but from joy. That grin he wore, pure and electric, was the kind of joy you can't fake. For one split second, I felt it again. That dizzy hope, the promise keep him safe. Don't let him feel alone. My throat tightened, my chest ached. But then, like glass through sunlight, the memory shattered. I saw the headlines, heard the soft click of the recorder in his pocket, felt the jagged tear of William's letter between my hands. The silence between us turned to stone. And finally, I spoke. My voice low and cold as steel. Family used to mean something. And before his sob could cut through the line, I hung up. The phone slid from my hand onto the table with a dull thud. Beyond the glass, the city sprawled, bright, pulsing, and utterly indifferent. A sea of lights with no space left for sentiment. Some wars don't end in triumph. They end in silence. And the sound of your own heartbeat, colder than you thought a human heart could ever become. 1 week later, the headlines did what Evan Mercer couldn't. They screamed. Fastest collapse in lane logistics history. Vice President Evan Mercer liquidates personal assets amid lawsuits. Clause 17 wrecks promising career. Every article read like a postmortem. Cold, efficient, brutally detached, failed contracts, seized vendor lines, lawsuits wrapped around his name like chains. The same name that once opened every boardroom door now shut them harder than any slam I could have delivered. I didn't celebrate. There were no toasts, no speeches, no one-liners about karma. Just silence. The kind that stays in your chest long after the air returns. This morning, the board voted unanimously operational control would revert to me under the trust structure William had built. No drama, no cameras, just a pen, a vote, and 32 years of unbroken loyalty leading me back into the seat I had earned before Evan knew how to spell fiduciary. The new office smelled like fresh varnish and ambition, but to me, it felt hollow. A cathedral of ghosts. I walked the length of the room, slowly heels whispering across the marble until I reached the mahogany desk, the one that once belonged to William. Its top drawer slid open with a sigh, revealing the brass key I knew by touch. The wall safe behind the credenza clicked open beneath my hand. Inside, the bones of a legacy. Old ledgers, William's ink-stained pen. A silver photo frame dulled by time. I lifted it carefully. 3 faces smiled up at me from another life. William in his faded fishing hat. Evan, just a boy, then grinning, gap-toothed proud. And me, sun-kissed and laughing, a plastic bucket of minnows in my lap. One perfect day, when family was simple, still whole. Pain climbed into my chest and sat heavy. I lowered into the leather chair, the photo warm in my hands, and whispered, "You were right, William. Blood isn't always loyalty." The truth stung, more than victory soothed. I reached for the wooden box I had carried through every storm, the one that held William's last letter. I opened it gently, read the line again, "Promise me he'll never feel alone." My breath caught. I folded the letter, set the photo atop it, and closed the box. Then without ceremony, I placed it back inside the safe, turned the key, sealing away love, regret, and the war I never wanted to fight. Outside the glass wall, the city glittered. Cold, sharp. Behind me, the office hummed, waiting for orders. Victory was mine, but so was the silence. If you've walked this path with me through the silence, the betrayal, and the cost of keeping a promise, then I invite you to speak. Not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been cast aside by the very people they protected. Leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what I should do next. Because sometimes, even when you win, you're left holding pieces of a war no one else saw coming. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Protect your legacy, but never forget to protect yourself. Loyalty without boundaries becomes sacrifice. Choose wisely.